Hello, I'm Dr. Lisa Colledge. Welcome to Culture by Neurodesign. Today I'm going to share some thoughts on a big question that's occupied a lot of my cognitive time and attention for several years, ever since I began leading a neurodivergence inclusion ERG, employee resource group, at a large global organization. Now, in that role, I noticed a big mismatch between the typical goals of the people active in neurodivergence inclusion and the scale of impact that I was actually seeing. On one hand, the goal tended to be compliance driven. You create accommodations after someone proves their diagnosis. But on the other hand, I saw a much more widespread impact and potential impact than I was prepared for. The possible accommodations were impactful for people who had never been diagnosed or who were just starting to learn about their neurodivergence, often through the lens of their children, and were starting to feel that they saw themselves and felt validated. And they felt relief that their experience of being on the outside had a real basis, but frustration that they were excluded from the benefits that could come with a formal diagnosis, which they might not have or might not feel the need to get, because then they couldn't participate in the so-called solution that was based on companies responding to a proven diagnosis. So the typical approach that I saw people striving for just didn't match what I was seeing about the need and the potential impact. And that mismatch led me to a couple of questions, which are what I want to focus on in this podcast. First question is, are dedicated autism-focused neurodivergence programs the best we can do? And the second question is, are they enough to help all the people who could benefit and to ensure that the full extent of that benefit is felt by organizational outcomes? A spoiler, those kind of programs were a major breakthrough, but they're no longer enough, in my opinion, based on my research and my experience. Our knowledge has moved on and our approach needs to evolve with it. So let me give you an example of why I say they're not enough before I explain more about what these dedicated programs are and the results that they bring. Now, if you're a founder, a team lead, anyone who's trying to build a resilient, high-performing team, that's the kind of team that can make the most of AI or thrive through other kinds of disruption and create sustainable innovation. If you're one of those people, it's highly unlikely that you happen to work in one of that handful of companies with a dedicated Autism at Work initiative. So there you are. They're not enough. That's just one reason. So what can you do instead? I'll come to that. And in this episode, I'm going to walk you through what the first generation of largely tech-led Autism at Work programs got right, why they're not the best solution for today's teams and organizations, and what a next generation culture first approach looks like, so you can start making changes right where you are, wherever that may be. So what did those pioneering programs get right? A big part of the movement traces back to Specialisterne, a company that was founded in 2004 by Thorkild Sonne after his son was diagnosed autistic. Now, Thorkild saw that the traditional job market was failing brilliant minds like his son simply because those minds didn't match the social and sensory norms that people expected. For example, standard interviews often exclude autistic talent, unintentionally, but nevertheless excluded. So it's very common to hear autistic candidates, just like the lady I'm about to quote, say that they knew 5 or 10 minutes into a panel interview that they wouldn't get the job. The lady I'm quoting said she couldn't maintain eye contact. She couldn't decode questions that she experienced as vague, like, tell me about a time you faced a challenge. And although she asked, she wasn't allowed to demonstrate her technical ability on a computer, so she felt like she'd lost before she even started. With experiences like this in mind, Specialisterne developed non-interview based assessment methods for candidates that directly measured the skills they were looking for. And that approach was to create hangouts, which are half-day gatherings where candidates could demonstrate their abilities in informal interactions. And from there, candidates might enter a multi-week assessment and training program using tools like Lego Mindstorms to show how they can solve problems in teams. So this became a practical, proven model, and Specialist Learn built this experience together with their experience of supporting successful autistic candidates in the workplace. They built all of that into a framework around 7 principles, of which non-traditional assessments was one, but also things like structured training, the involvement of social partners, which is about bringing in community organizations to help to find and support autistic employees, building scalable models, which are programs that can be adapted across roles and geographies, and tailored career management. Now that approach worked, and it didn't only work in the non-profit model that Specialist Learn itself used, but it also worked in major corporations. So there's a group of pioneering corporations, SAP, Microsoft, EY, JP Morgan, and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, that were all recognized with a UN Global Corporate Citizenship Award because of the programs they implemented based on the Specialist Learn model, and it's an award that's well deserved in my opinion. Let's zoom in on SAP, a multinational software company and the world's largest vendor of enterprise resource planning software. And when they launched their Autism at Work program in 2013, it was groundbreaking. Instead of traditional interview processes, they used team tasks and robotic challenges to measure real-world problem-solving capabilities in autistic candidates. And for successful candidates, they introduced 2 support circles for each new hire, a work circle with a buddy, a coach, and a mentor, and a personal circle including family and counsellors. As far as the results go, let me start with a few anecdotes. So there's one anecdote about a team of autistic employees that developed a technical fix that saved $40 million. There's another anecdote about an autistic support analyst who spotted an innovative opportunity to create resources that enabled customers to help solve their own issues, and thousands of customers used those resources. And managers became, in general, clearer and more thoughtful because they had to be, with this different type of talent in some of their teams. Now, in light of these observations and the broad impact that was being experienced, Silvio Bessa, Senior Vice President of SAP's Digital Business Services, noted that it helps our tendency as a big company to all look in the same direction. So one outcome I want to emphasize is that SAP didn't just place autistic talent in software development. They were placed in HR to organize and plan HR activities, in customer support on the phones and reacting to unpredictable customer problems, somewhere you wouldn't normally expect autistic people to want to work. In product management, where they coordinated the development of new offerings, and also in consulting to help customers apply SAP solutions to their own problems. Now, we often have an assumption that autistic people only thrive in highly structured technical roles because there's such a perfect match between the skills they tend to have and the needs of technology, as I discussed in episode 33, where I talked about the high proportion of autistic people in Silicon Valley. But that's not the full picture, and SAP, amongst others, has proved that. Beyond these anecdotes, let me share some quantitative outcomes reported by the DXC Dandelion program, which partners with multiple client organizations in Australia and New Zealand. And they've systematically captured outcomes across the many clients that they support with neurodivergence at work programs. 92% retention of autistic talent, a 30 to 40% productivity boost in companies after they recruit autistic talent. 80% of co-workers said there was no added workload. 100% of participating companies made permanent offers to the autistic talent after the program was completed, and 92% of companies reported a competitive advantage. Now, these results are outstanding. And as I said, these programs were a major breakthrough. They've improved awareness and the working environment for many autistic people who participated. But that doesn't mean the model's right for everyone, or that it can't be improved. So now let me talk about the problems with these programs. I'm going to start by talking about ASML, as a great example of a company which has taken a step beyond the initial programs to get started on this topic of their problems. Now, ASML is a global tech leader. It's headquartered here in the Netherlands, and they make the machines that make computer chips. Innovation is their lifeblood, and they equate their innovation with their neurodiverse workforce. Peter Ballier, ASML's Executive Vice President of HR, has been quoted as saying, "If you look at some of the strengths of neurodiversity, like innovation and creativity, that's exactly what we need at an innovative company like ASML. ASML wouldn't be where it is today without neurodivergent people." And notice that he didn't say autistic people. He said neurodivergent people. Now that includes autism, yes, but it also includes ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety, PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, burnout, sensory processing differences, and more, as well as just plain unconventional thinkers with no diagnosis at all. And that's one way that dedicated programs fall short. They're designed around autism only, disclosure, and central coordination. And in that design, they miss the breadth of neurostyles needed to power innovation, which ASML has noted. And that breadth of neurostyles extends well beyond neurodivergence. And let's break it down. These programs don't scale well. Firstly, they don't scale across the whole organization. Now, I've heard from employees in big name companies, who I'm going to obviously allowed to remain anonymous. I've heard from employees who were passed over for leadership roles because they weren't seen as well-rounded. And one person, an autistic man, who held a US patent and helped launch a major new regional infrastructure, was denied a promotion based on the perception of his autistic potential, not on his performance. And he now works elsewhere in a culture that does value clarity and contribution, and that culture does not have a formal neurodivergence recruitment program, but the culture works. Second, these programs don't scale to everybody who could benefit. Many people can't or won't disclose their neurodivergence. Maybe they're still figuring it out, having been diagnosed later in life, or maybe they've been bullied for their differences in the past. Maybe they fear discrimination. Maybe they don't even know that they're neurodivergent. If you're not diagnosed, or you just missed a diagnosis, you're locked out of these programs, even though you would also benefit. And third, they don't scale across all of our different types of organizations. These programs take central coordination, they take resources, and they take time. That's fine if you're SAP or Microsoft, but what if you're in one of the many organizations without one of these programs? Perhaps you lead a department that doesn't have any DEI budget, or you've just inherited a team and you're finding a lot of friction in that team. Or perhaps you're a founder who's about to make your first hires. You need something that works now with the people that you have in the context that you're in. And you can't afford to wait around for one of these dedicated programs. So that's where a cultural approach comes in. Now, ASML, as I said, has taken a step in this direction, but what does a full cultural approach look like? Now, if you're someone who's building a team, you likely want that team to be high performing, able to handle complexity and ambiguity, strong on positive mental health and engagement, and energizing to work in. So you want the benefits of the neurodiverse hiring programs without the limitations that they bring. You need a culture that works for diverse minds, and that's why I developed my FIT framework. FIT stands for fair, intentional, and team-minded. I'll take them one at a time. FAIR is about joint responsibility. Leaders empower diverse neurostyles by removing unnecessary barriers like thinking there's only one way to do something. Team members build cultures where differences are seen as advantages and where they're trained in behavior so that everyone in the team can thrive. That's fair. Intentional means the culture is proactive and designed. It anticipates the fact that there are different cognitive needs, different cognitive styles in the team. It knows they're there. It doesn't wait to be told. Team members are upskilled to fight assumptions, biases that we all have, and to build a curiosity-driven team environment. And the T is for team-minded, so it's about the collective success. Leaders need to model shared success, not individual heroics, which is really risky, as I discussed in episode 31. The team members contribute to a joint outcome and they succeed together. And as such, they learn to see differences between them as assets and align those differences to shared goals. Now, all of this is enabled by the freedom within a framework leadership approach that offers clarity in terms of vision, goals, and support, but with room for people to define how they contribute. So what does a cognitively inclusive, neurodiverse inclusive culture feel like? It's not abstract. Here's what you notice. First of all, psychological safety is high. People feel safe to ask questions and challenge ideas and be honest with each other. Second, the collaboration feels energizing, and different styles complement and reinforce each other rather than clash. Third, communication and ways of working are flexible, and people can share their contributions in the ways that work for them. Fourth, decisions are based on contributions from diverse thinking styles. So there's no dominant voice steamrolling everybody else, and it's multiple viewpoints that shape the outcome. And fifth and finally, stress is low. Don't get me wrong, that does not mean that performance is low. It's quite the opposite, because the expectations are clear and people can play to their strengths together. Performance is exceptionally high. And this is the kind of culture that's also your best asset for innovation. The research shows that. For more on that topic, check out episode 14, where I talk about how the different skills that tend to be associated with different neurostyles align along the stages of the innovation cycle, all the way from ideation to execution to completion. So now I want to turn to EY. Their neurodiverse centres of excellence began as one of the autism hiring initiatives, but they evolved into something broader. They moved towards universal design, a cultural approach, which means everyone defines their own working conditions. No one is required to disclose if they are neurodivergent, and inclusion for everybody is baked into the system. Hiran Shukla, who leads the global program, said large organizations are really good at assimilation to build large workforces that inadvertently shave away the beautiful, unique edges, but it's a spiky profile that you want to retain. That's the point. That's also what we saw with the ASML example, that the differences, the spikes, that's what gives rise to the innovation if you can make them work together. So when you design for spiky profiles, you help everyone to contribute more fully. This kind of approach is inspired by autism, by the Autism at Work type programs, inspired by neurodivergence, but it benefits 100% of your team members. And you don't need $1 million DEI program to do it. You can start with one team, pilot quietly, and lead from wherever you are when you decide to try it out. So that is why I don't advocate for compliance first approaches like the traditional Autism at Work type programs. I explain more about that in my article, which is called Stop Waiting for a Diagnosis, Neuro-Inclusive Design Beats Tradition so you can outperform, outpace and outlast the competition. And you'll find the link in the notes associated with this episode. So if you know someone who's just taken on a new team, or someone who's scaling their startup, or anyone trying to lead in a way that feels more authentic and close to their inclusive principles, please share this episode with them. And if that person is you, I'd love to hear from you, and we can explore how the approach that I advocate aligns with your situation and needs. Thanks for listening.